everyone. Welcome to this month's Octopus 101 for the region of America. So, for folks in North America, South America, this is your webinar. My name is John Bristowe. I'm the Community Director for Octopus Deploy. Thank you for your time and attention. Welcome to today's webinar. If you haven't been in this webinar before, don't worry, you're in the right place. This is basically a webinar to get you up to speed on everything and anything that Octopus Deploy does. It is entitled Octopus 101 because it is considered an introductory course to Octopus itself. So if you've never seen Octopus before, or you've heard about it and you're kind of curious, want to find out more information about it, congratulations, you're in the right place. In addition to that, this is also a live webinar. So I will be taking your questions live. You can see we've got some folks here joining us from Massachusetts in the house. Awesome. I got folks from all over the US and Canada joining us today, which is great. Thank you. Welcome. So in this webinar here, we're going to touch on basically all the things you need to know to get started with Octopus Deploy. So welcome. All right, so to kick things off, I'll just give you my email address. If you need to reach me, feel free. I have no problem answering any questions you have over email. Happy to do so. So in this webinar, we're going to be touching on a whole bunch of things. Primarily, we're going to talk a little bit about, basically the building blocks of Octopus, how it works and why it works the way it does. And I think understanding the why is really important. As I've said this repeatedly in this webinar, understanding a why for a technology is critical because it allows you to understand where a technology fits in your company's processes, its organization, etc. So we'll talk a little bit about what Octopus is, how it works, and why it does what it does, and then we'll go immediately into defining some terms. The reason why this is important is because obviously as we talk about deployments, projects, releases, variables, etc. These are the building blocks of establishing a deployment pipeline built with Octopus. And so we'll talk about what those things are and why they're important. Then we'll go straight into a demo. We'll talk a little bit about how to create a deployment process, but happy to talk about anything. If you have any questions at all, any comments, you want to see something in particular, happy to adjust accordingly. And then we'll see how we can trigger that deployment using a CI server or process. CI stands for continuous integration. It's the process by which developers build and test their code in a repeatable and reliable manner. At the end result of that, you get a package, which is like a binary, that formulates your application or deliverable. From there, that is what goes into a deployment pipeline. And so that's why when we talk about how we will trigger a deployment in an automated context, we typically start with CI. We typically start with a build server. So we'll talk about how to do that. And we'll use GitHub Actions, but we can take a look at all kinds of scenarios: Azure DevOps, Jenkins, BuildKite, GitLab, TeamCity. There's a whole bunch of different solutions out there, and we'll talk about any of them as you see fit. All right, sound good. Let's talk a little bit about what life looks like for the average developer today. So developers today will typically build out a solution, obviously using code, but they'll use a solution like GitHub, Jenkins, TeamCity, CircleCI, etc. There's a ton of solutions out there for you to use as a developer to build code. You'll also possibly test that code. In this scenario, you will utilize a solution for doing deployments. The ideal scenario, of course, is one that utilizes Octopus. Now, I'm biased, of course, but the idea here is with Octopus is that this slots right into a best-of-breed pipeline. So we basically are positioning Octopus as your deployment tool for doing continuous delivery, or CD. And then at the end, you'll see that the deployment goes into a wide range of different types of targets. You may have targets based in the cloud. You may be hosting them yourselves, like an on-premise solution, or you may choose to employ a hybrid topology for deployments, all of which we support. So those are pretty easy scenarios for us to support as part of Octopus Deploy. Now, understanding the positioning for this, or the business case for this, is pretty easy. Typically, what you see with most development teams today is that without Octopus Deploy, or without a dedicated CD solution, you've got all these scripts living in a variety of different locations. We like to call this DIY CD, or do it yourself continuous delivery. You also have a challenge of that now you're maintaining all these scripts and you've gotten away from your primary role, which is to build applications. With Octopus Deploy, we quantify all of the terms that we'll be talking about in terms of things like deployment processes, projects, etc. And then we give you a very safe and sane way to do deployments using Octopus. We have built-in capabilities for rollbacks. You can employ deployment patterns like blue, green, canary, etc. You also have the ability to quantify things like variables. You can also integrate with a variety of systems using our steps. These and other things we provide as part of a solution. Now, another way to think about this is typically with a topology that might look like this. This is a typical sort of topology you might see logically from an organization perspective. So, starting in the top left, we have solutions that are built inside of Git. We use Git as our source control, and there are a number of solutions out there. But as you'll see, the challenge with utilizing it this sort of all-in-one solution is typically CD is seen as an afterthought. The CI is done really well, but the CD isn't. And so with a lot of these solutions is that you have to typically write your own scripts. You have to write a lot of the stuff yourself to provision environments, to get deployments rolling. And then as you start to scale this out across teams or across capability, this becomes really, really hard to manage because a lot of the stuff that is dedicated for managing the stuff isn't built in out of the box. So your environments look a little bit clunky. You have things like dev test prod typically, but even managing that can be an arduous journey. You have to manage a lot of this stuff yourself, not only your own scripts, but also the tools that go along with them. So things like kubectl for Kubernetes clusters, your environment variables change across environments. It just becomes a bit of a nightmare here. And so you've got a lot of this custom code being deployed to a variety of targets, and using your all-in-one experience is not ideal. So what we're proposing is that you utilize a solution like Octopus Deploy to manage all this stuff. The reason why is because, as I said before, it allows you to scale your deployments as your team grows and as your capabilities and requirements grow alongside. So we define environments. You can do environment progression. You can do rollbacks. You can do approval processes with this as well. So you can actually integrate with solutions like ServiceNow or Jira Service Management, for example, and do approvals that are triggered via those solutions. Out of the box, we give you release orchestration. We automate not only your deployments, but also ops capabilities through a facility we have called Runbooks. We'll talk about that in our demo. We also have a variety of patterns you can implement. Blue, green, and canary are two that I mentioned, but we have others as well. And across the board, we have auditing, logging, RBAC built in so that you have assurance going forward with this as a solution. Now, for those folks who are utilizing GitHub, very popular solution. Obviously, this is what it might look like in the context of Octopus Deploy. Again, these are just sort of the 50,000 foot view of what this stuff looks like. So at the top left here, we have VS Code. We also have our code commits being done against GitHub through a repository. If we want, we can also utilize a variety of facilities there. But out of the box, we support GitHub Actions. We have a GitHub app as well, and we have GitHub. We have extension for GitHub Copilot, so you can actually interface with Octopus Deploy using natural language query through an AI mechanism. So this is great. We have a lot of capabilities here, and this is not just isolated to GitHub. This is just an example of what this might look like in those scenarios. Awesome stuff. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. Hopefully this is crystal clear, or you've already fallen asleep. Either way, we'll go into a demo. So let's break out into a demo now. So I'm going to jump over to my environment here. I know I've got a lot of tabs up here. Don't worry. We'll talk about each one of these things here. But I wanted to present to you Octopus Deploy. So if you've never seen Octopus Deploy, this is the dashboard we have available. So in the center here, we have our projects, and projects are denoted by these items here on the left-hand side. Across the top here, you can see we have our various environments. So I have an environment here called development, staging, and testing and production. These and other environments you can specify when configuring your project. These aren't specific to Octopus Deploy. You can name these anything you want, but they are there for you to establish. Now, in the middle here, you'll notice I have different versions of my application that have been deployed. So instantly, I get a status of what's available to me in terms of my versions. Now, obviously, this is a contrived and simple example. You would typically see a lot more complexity here, but I'm just trying to present the idea that you get different versions of your environment. If I had a deployment that had failed, and that happens all the time, deployments fail for a variety of reasons, I would see a red X appear, and that would give me at a glance indication that, hey, I've got a deployment here that I have to resolve. I may have to roll it back. I may have to resolve some other issue entirely. And as I said, those things can happen for a variety of reasons. Awesome. So the dashboard provides, as I said before, that sort of one-stop shop for everything you need to understand around what the status of your deployments are across your projects. Now, looking at a little bit more complicated scenario, and notice that we also support dark mode as well. So this is the same interface, but just in dark mode. So in this scenario here, I've got a little bit more going on. I've got a variety of projects listed. I can give them custom icons, etc. I can group them by project group. I can also isolate these based on a concept we have called spaces. So in the top left-hand corner here, you can see I have a drop-down list of spaces. And this allows me to isolate projects from each other. So if I have different teams that I want to isolate from each other, let's say I have a team working on the website, I have another team working on databases for deployments. This is stuff that I can isolate via spaces. In addition to that, I can also utilize spaces in the context of user roles as well. So we apply that RBAC across role-based access security across all of that stuff that you see here. All right, so we've talked about a couple of terms. We talked about projects. We talked about our releases here. Let's now drill into the heart of Octopus, which is a deployment process. So I'm going to click on one of these projects. It really doesn't matter which project we use. We can build one from scratch. I just want to show you what a deployment process looks like. So I've gone into this application here, Insurance Claim Portal. It could be Acme Corp. It doesn't matter. The name is irrelevant. What I want to show you here is this thing here called a deployment process. This is really the heart, the lifeblood of what Octopus does as a solution. So inside here, in the middle, you'll see I have a variety of steps. These are called steps here. And what these steps do is they, as a collection, in their total, they comprise a deployment process. So when you think about deployment process, think of a collection of steps doing actions to do a deployment. So you can think of it, other terms that might be synonymous might be like a workflow. This is essentially the same idea. These actions or steps, whatever you want to call them, we call them steps, they are basically autonomous units of work. So you can see here I'm doing things like log into AWS and run a script. Then maybe later on, I'm going to go ahead and deploy to an ECS cluster. Then later on, I may want to run some custom script as well. This one is obviously very particular to Amazon, but these are other steps I can comprise very easily. I can compose these deployment patterns very easily. Let's go ahead and now add a step. I want to show you what the editor experience looks like. You can ignore this little warning here. That's just because we have a setup here for this, but I just want to show you what steps look like in the context of a deployment process. So notice here the view changes. I'm now inside what's called the process editor. The process editor is where I go to modify my existing deployment processes. My deployment process is now represented here in this well. So I have 6 steps that comprise my deployment process. And in the middle here, I have a range of what are called step templates for me to pick and choose from. We have well over 500 different types of steps you can use to integrate with various systems to do deployments. So we've had them categorized here. So these are our categories here. You can see we have categories like, script steps or ones for Kubernetes. I have ones here for Terraform, various cloud native services as well. We also have ones for particular server environments if you so wish. If you have a step here that you need that isn't supported, we also have a wide variety of steps here written by the community. We have over 570 steps that have been written by the community. And these are for a variety of reasons. The community wants to utilize steps in the context of a deployment. So these are things like, integrate with Argo, or maybe I want to do something particular to Azure DevOps, or Datadog, or F5, or Git Independent, or IIS. These and other steps have been built by the community. If we don't have them built out of the box, you can utilize these in those contexts. Let's go ahead and make this simple. I'm going to add our most popular step here, which is run a script. So run a script is kind of like, give me the wheel, I want to drive. So it's basically allows you to write some custom code to run in the context of a deployment. So to add it, I simply just click on add step, and then I'm presented with this dialog here. So I'm going to collapse all the features here. Now, this is kind of like seeing the airplane, the cockpit of an airplane. There's lots of buttons and knobs here. Don't worry. We're still doing a very simple step here, which is run a script. However, I can control, if I so choose, how that step will run in the context of a deployment. So when I'm doing the deployment, I'm thinking, okay, there's a variety of things I may want to do with this particular step. For example, I may want to provide an ability to run retries. You might ask yourself, why? Well, think about a scenario where you're doing network calls. You have things like latency. That's out of your control. You can't control latency. And so you may want to invoke this step if upon failure it doesn't work. So you can automatically turn on these sort of meta properties for a step. We have things like retries. We also have things like conditions. So we can say things like only run this step if the previous one succeeded, or if it failed, or always run it, etc. So these and other sort of conditions and properties are available on all steps. We list these as conditions. But in the example here, I'm just simply running a script. So what does that look like? So I know I'm presenting a lot to you, but I want to basically rip the Band-Aid off and have you see Octopus in the raw. But here we go. So this is run a script. A script has a location. It can come in one of three locations. So it can be either an inline script, so one that I define directly inside a deployment process. It can come from a Git repository. So I can say, go to that Git repository over there and utilize the script that's listed there to run inside of this context, inside of this deployment. Or we have the ability to grab a script from a package. So what is a package? That's like a zip archive, or some kind of other a package that you might use from a different location. So if I'm using Artifactory, for example, or NuGet, or other solutions that allow me to pull down packages, I can automatically pull down a package from a remote location and utilize a script that's inside that package to run a script step here for this. So if I take a look at this, we can define this as an inline script, and I can utilize a variety of languages. So I'm using PowerShell here. I can just say, hello world, for example. And then once this is defined, I can then utilize that script in the context of my deployment process here. All right, so this is a deployment process. These are the steps that run. If I want to see what this looks like in terms of the context of a running itself, I'm just going to go ahead and jump over to a previous release. This is sort of like a cooking show. Here's one I prepared earlier, pulling it out of the oven, rather than watch me bake the whole thing. So I can take a look at any number of these releases here. So you can see we've deployed a few releases over the years. And here's an example of one of those releases. So this release here has been deployed to our development environment and to our test environment. You can see we have a couple of packages associated with this release. And then in addition to that, I have a wide variety of variables I can also use as well. So variables are a really powerful mechanism of Octopus, because what variables allow you to do is abstract out those things that may change over time or over environments. So a common problem, the scenario I outlined earlier, where you're writing your own scripts and you're having to manage all this stuff. Something that often is forgotten when you do DIY CD is, hey, things will change between environments. You may want to parameterize those things. We do that through a feature called variables. So variables gives you this ability to control where and when these values are propagated. Notice here we have support for things like sensitive values, etc. We can also pull these from a remote location. We can pull these from like HashiCorp Vault. And so there's a wide variety of capabilities we can use here. So with this release now done, I can take a look at its deployment. So if I jump back to my dashboard here, I can take a look at one of these deployments that's been done. This is a deployment that's been done against our development environment. Notice in here, I get a full task log of everything. Now, I don't have these logs listed here because I did this deployment quite a while ago. So I'm going to jump over here to my other environment. Again, just showing off a theme. I do this because I want to just quickly showcase the fact that we have different types of theme support. So if I jump into a different project, again, the name isn't important. What matters are the deployments itself. I just want to show off the audit log. So you can see here, this is my example, hello world. It's a very simple example. I can drill in here and get a full listing of everything that occurred when running this. And so this is a very simple example, but we get a whole listing of log entries that show me what happened underneath the covers. And this allows me to debug steps very easily. If something went wrong, I can trace it and make it available. In addition to that, I also see a full history of what happened for the deployment. So for every deployment that I do, I not only see what happened, when it happened, but also who executed that deployment. This is super important for organizations that need to control who's doing deployments. And so you get all this information listed as part of that. I can also see what changes went into this. Now, I don't have any changes here because it's a very simple example, but if I had build associated build info, I would see that propagated here as part of this summary. So these and other capabilities are built out of the box for Octopus, and you can see the ability to basically audit this across the board. I can certainly utilize this in a variety of ways. I can exploit a timeline here. I can roll back changes as well. So I can roll back deployments if I so wish, and I can also promote them across environments as well. So if I jump into my dashboard, I can easily promote this to a staging environment, for example. What is an environment, you may ask? I know I'm presenting a lot of stuff here, but I just want to quickly showcase this. I'm going to take myself off the screen here so you can see the full view. So if we jump back into our system settings here, we have this tab here for what are called environments. Environments are just names that you give to associated targets. So you can see here I can define as many different types of environments I want, and then I can put deployment targets in each one of those environments. So here I just have a simple cloud region inside of my environment. To define these deployment targets, I navigate over to this option here, deployment targets, and I can add additional deployment targets that I want to target here. So for example, if I want to target Kubernetes, or I want to target Linux or Mac or Windows or AWS or Azure, etc., these and other targets I can easily set up. Now we set these up as what are called tentacle. So we're using, it's just a marketing term, but basically it's like an agent. It's a remote agent that will do work on your behalf that you can communicate to from Octopus. And that's important because you want to have the ability to talk to remote agents to do work. So set up files, lay files down on disk, do various configs. That what happens is when you execute your deployments, that deployment code will run via the tentacle that you have remotely installed, and we provide a mechanism for you to install them. You may wonder what's the difference between a listening target and a listening tentacle and a polling tentacle. It has to do with firewall configs and how you want to set up these in your environment. So a listening tentacle will simply listen for commands on a well-known port. A polling tentacle will call back to your Octopus instance. Hey, do you have any work? Hey, do you have any work? We do support high availability environments as well, so that's something to be to bear mention as part of this. All right, I realize I've gone on for quite a while here. There's lots of stuff to obviously talk about, but that's kind of like a very quick hello world sort of demo for Octopus itself. I also want to make sure that I'm cognizant of the fact that there may be questions coming in. I'm just looking here. I don't see any questions listed. So great stuff. Awesome. Thank you. I know it's a lot. I realize that when people see Octopus for the first time, like, whoa, what is this? It's a lot. But the reality is once you set up Octopus and you integrate it as an automated context for your deployments, it's kind of like a set and forget sort of thing. You set it up and you set up your environments, and then you're good, and it does all your deployments accordingly. You can obviously evolve them over time, and a lot of customers do. And there's other features as well that I haven't even touched on, like tenants, that customers use and make it a really powerful solution. But essentially, that's Hello Octopus from a demo perspective. Now, to recap, there's lots of stuff that you've seen here in the demo. Just to give you a sense of what is exposed from the perspective of if you're utilizing a deployment process. So out of the box, we provide you a visual representation of your deployment process. And something that I didn't have time, but I can show you in a demo following this is you can set up conditions as well as you can establish child steps. So child steps are essentially like if this succeeded or if this fails, run this. I can also set up parallel execution and lots of capabilities there. We also integrate things like markdown-based notes. The reason why this is important is because obviously in a team environment where you have lots of teams using Octopus for its deployments, you want to share or annotate, hey, this is what this step does, or hey, this step requires a particular user to do something, in the case of something we have called a manual intervention. A manual intervention is a particular type of step that says, go grab a human being, grab them by the shirt collar, put them in front of Octopus and say, please approve this deployment. So you can actually have manual approval of deployments for cases that are highly sensitive, like doing a database migration, for example. We also have the ability to run steps in parallel, so you can have them run accordingly. In addition to that, we have support for what are called environment labels. Now, this is a really powerful concept. So you may not see this because of the graphic here, but what this says here is staging. What this means is that I can have individual steps run only in certain cases. So I can have a individual step run in only specific environments, which is really nice because you can have now your deployment process tailor itself based on the types of environments you're executing against, which is great. Allows you to have a lot of control. An example of this might be before we push to production, you may want to contact a human being and say, please approve this before we go ahead and do so. Or another example may be if I'm executing a deployment in a staging environment, maybe I want to notify folks via Slack. We have Slack integration, we have Teams integration, we have all kinds of different integrations. But I may want to send them a notification to the development team. Hey, this deployment's going out, just FYI. It's going to staging, so no biggie. And here you can see the running instance of it if you want. So those are certain things that you can do in those contexts. Now, kind of getting back to some of the benefits here, I highlighted some of these during the demo, but I'll get back into a demo here. And again, if you have any questions or comments or things you want to see, just let me know. So the whole point here is to provide essentially an environment or a solution that gives you reliable and risk-free deployments. Why is this important? Because deployments are things you don't want to screw up. They cause a lot of headaches if you get them wrong. And so utilizing a solution like Octopus allows you to do deployments in a safe and sane manner, but also gives you the assurance of doing rollbacks if necessary. And so with built-in rollback support, you can easily deploy to a production environment, then revert that back if necessary because things went wrong. And there are any number of reasons why things go wrong. And some of those are in your control and some of them are not. In addition to that, obviously, when talking about Octopus, there's the DevOps conversation. Oftentimes, we focus a lot on the dev and not the ops. And so, with DevOps, obviously, we want to make sure that we're doing operations as well. So, out of the box, Octopus has a capability called runbooks that you can also use. So, this is really useful if you want to manage servers, you want to do emergency updates, you maybe want to reboot a server that's gone wonky, maybe you want to back up a database, things like that. These and other things you can quantify in what's called a runbook. Now, the reason why this is powerful is because runbooks are composed just like a deployment process. There are a series of steps that you run one after another. But the nice thing here is that you can have your junior devs or your junior ops people who are on pager duty execute them with the full creds necessary to do those operations. So let's think of an example here where maybe I want to back up a database. That might be a highly privileged operation against the database. And as someone on pager duty or someone who is doesn't maybe have all the rights and permissions to touch certain servers, if I quantify that in a runbook, I can preload basically the necessary creds or permissions with that. And all someone has to do is just simply come up to a button and click on run, obviously assuming they've logged in and have permissions. But they have all the elevated necessary permissions to perform those operations. They don't have the ability, obviously, to access those creds, but that has all been preloaded inside the runbook and made available so that anyone who has rights can go up and say, yep, back up the database, or yep, let's do an emergency reboot on the web server because things are, for reasons. So runbooks are a really powerful mechanism and really are tied into release management because they're the ops side of the DevOps equation when thinking about this. And so runbooks allow you to automate those routine tasks or emergency ops, which are great. Obviously, we don't want to do this all the time, but if you need to, it's very important. So in addition to that, if you're working with containers via, for example, like Docker, or you're utilizing container services, like you're targeting a Kubernetes cluster, for example, we integrate with YAML, Helm. There's also customized support, etc., which is great. And then another feature that I mentioned or touched on, but I haven't shown yet, I'll show you an example of this, is tenants. So tenants are a concept that we have built into Octopus, hugely powerful capability in Octopus, and is used typically by folks who are much more mature in the sort of usage or life cycle of using Octopus. Tenants are our ability to basically deploy the same application, but in different means or in different ways. So a scenario where you might have a tenant might be, let's say I'm in the US and I'm deploying agent software. Let's say I'm running a vet clinic or a hospital or a school. I can set up each one of those as individual tenants. So I can have different schools in my district, and they get different versions of my application based on their description that I have listed as a tenant. This is something that is very difficult to do if you're doing DIY CD. You have to basically quantify all of this yourself. In Octopus, it's just available as what's called a tenant. So you can utilize this very easily as part of our capability, and allows you to do deployments across different types of tenants as well. And of course, it wouldn't be a solution if you didn't have integration with governance and compliance and being able to obviously audit everything. So I showed you some examples here of the audit trail that occurs when you do a deployment. But these and other capabilities allow you to track who's doing what, where, and why, which is really nice. It's really important to actually understand this stuff, especially if you're looking at, let's find out what occurred and let's make sure it doesn't happen again. Sorry, I'm just going to take a little sip of my coffee here. I'm in Australia, by the way. Despite my accent, it's 5 a.m. for me, so apologies. I need a little bit of pick me up. All right, so let's jump back into a demo here. In here, it doesn't really matter too much, but so jumping back into this environment here. Now, a question that comes up, everything I've done here has been very point and click, and that's been deliberate on my part. I wanted to show you kind of like click this, this is how you set it up. The question now arises, okay, we're doing DevOps, we're doing automation. Where's the automations? Like how do I automate this stuff? Well, it turns out if you want to automate this stuff, there's a number of ways in which you can do this. And I mentioned this in the context of GitHub, because it's a scenario that I use. I use GitHub quite a bit. But when you see GitHub and you use a different CI solution, if you can just mentally think and search and replace in your mind GitHub with TeamCity or Jenkins or BuildKite or GitLab. These and other solutions also work the same way. So here's a scenario. I have a repo here called Octopus Shop. It really doesn't matter what the repo is. It could be anything. Let me get rid of my head here so you can see the full screen. So you have a repo here. It's called Octopus Shop. Typically in these solutions, you have a well-known location where you'll define your workflows. So in the case of GitHub, it's .github/workflows. This is where you'll run your workflows. But independent of that, it will be somewhere else if you're running Azure DevOps or Jenkins, etc. So inside here, I defined a series of YAML files. These YAML files define any types of workflows that I want to run. They don't have to be build specific. They can be for anything related to GitHub. I can do this for projects. I can do this for issues. You can define these very, very simply. So a YAML file here is just a simple text file with certain indentation. You'll notice in here, I'm basically doing some things. So if you haven't seen this before, don't worry. It's pretty easy to understand. So a YAML file is based on text. It has indentation to denote steps. It's similar in the sense that you define a workflow in the same way through a series of steps. So here I have a series of steps that utilize a capability you may have heard of called GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions are basically the building blocks of defining your workflows in GitHub. So you can see here, I'm using an action here called checkout, which allows me to check out a repository. So I'm grabbing the source code from the repository in a local context. I'm then setting up .NET through this GitHub action here called setup.net. And then from there, I'm running a CLI command because I now have .NET installed called .NET restore, which allows me to restore dependencies for my solution file. If you're doing JavaScript, for example, this might be npm. For example, if I'm using Go, I might want to do a restore command through the Go CLI, for example. If I'm using Java, using C++, they're all the same sort of idea. These series of actions that are run in concert are part of my CI process. So I'm basically doing CI here. I'm doing a build, and then I may run a bunch of tests, etc. All of this is to say, or to build up, that after you've done all of this preamble where you're doing builds and tests, down here at the bottom, you may now integrate with Octopus through our own set of actions. So we have a whole bunch of actions that integrate with GitHub that allow you to do things like push packages, create a release, deploy a release, run a runbook, things like this. You can easily call out through your GitHub actions. And this is how we link these two systems together. Through a series of GitHub actions, you can perform operations against a remote instance to do work. So that's the idea. So the automation context here is GitHub Actions, but we're basically interfacing with Octopus through this mechanism. If you want to see if some of the actions that are available, you can jump over to the GitHub Marketplace, search for Octopus, and you'll see them listed here. So these are all the actions that we have available for you to use. So things like run a runbook, for example, create a release, push a zip archive, push build information. This is a hugely powerful one. So build information are like all the commits that go into a repo. And let's say I want to use those to create release notes. We support that out of the box. So you just push that build information to Octopus. We parse all that. We make it available for a particular release. And when you go to create a release, we automatically comprise that as part of the build information. It's super powerful. So these and other types of actions I can execute in the context of a workflow based on GitHub. Now, if I'm not using GitHub, let's say I'm using something else like, TeamCity, for example. We have integration directly. This is the number one integration, incidentally, in the JetBrains marketplace for TeamCity, our integration here. And we expose actions like the similar ones you just saw, like create release, run a runbook, etc. These and other types of commands you can execute as part of a pipeline, if you will. We also have Azure DevOps, we have Jenkins, we have BuildKite. There's all kinds of integrations, but this is essentially how to do the automation aspect of DevOps. You're kicking off builds through any mechanism that is built in. So it could be like based on a pull request, but however that starts, from there you can then create a pipeline that will then escalate your builds, your packages into remote locations, i.e. Octopus for doing deployments. Now, let's assume a scenario whereby inside of Octopus, let's say you don't want to tie directly into a CI process. Let's say you want to use a package management solution and you want to get those packages deployed. So I don't want to key off a build. I don't want to key off a CI process. Rather, I'd rather just utilize these packages remotely, or I want to use something else. You can utilize a concept called feeds. So down here, you'll see this thing here called external feeds. What this is it's basically an external list of locations that you can integrate with that will track whether new packages are deployed to those locations, and we can automatically use those packages as part of a deployment. So once you have this set up with something like TeamCity, MyGet, Maven, etc., we'll pick up those packages and use them as part of a deployment process. And setting these things up are really easy. So I'll just show you what that looks like. So I can add a feed here, and we can, as you can see here, we have a variety of feed types here. So if I want, I can utilize any number of feed repositories. And once I have that established, I can then pull off packages off those external feeds for a deployment. Octopus itself has its own built-in package repository. So that earlier action you saw in the marketplace. So when you see this, let's see, create a zip package here, this one here, this allows you to deploy essentially a package to Octopus, because we have our own built-in package repository that you can use if you so wish. But you don't have to use that. We're very cognizant, and we respect the fact that people want to use different solutions. So this is something that you can build out of the box. There are other options here that bear mentioning. So this is what the packages look like in the remote. This is our built-in package repository. I don't have anything in here because I think this is just empty. This is my own package repository. But there's other things here that you can also use. You can utilize certificates, for example. This is important if you're wanting to manage these and use them in the context of a secure connection. For example, let's say you're utilizing certificates as part of a trusted chain, etc. Those are all aspects you can use. There are other aspects as well. I can also set up things like my Git credentials. So if I wanted to, I could set up Git credentials ahead of time to do a connection back to a repository if I wanted. So these and other options are available to me. So yes, I realize that there's a lot going on here. Obviously, I've shared with you a lot of context here in terms of Octopus, but that's the idea with this webinar. Octopus 101 is basically meant to expose you to how Octopus works, everything that's happening here. So hopefully you've gotten a little bit out of that. All right, so that basically wraps up our webinar. So I showed you a little bit of how Octopus works, but more importantly, I explained to you why you should consider using it. That's really, really important, is understanding the why behind the technology. You want to use Octopus because doing it yourself, rolling your own scripts, doing DIY CD is really, really hard, especially as you scale. Things look easy when you're just doing hello world. It's when you scale out, you start doing it across teams or start incorporating different requirements that things get really complex. I showed you some of the fundamentals. I showed you things like deployment processes. I showed you how to create them from scratch. I showed you how to do a release. We can do deployments very easily. I showed you all kinds of things here. I also showed you how you can automate your deployment process via an external process. So if you're kicking off a build through GitHub or TeamCity or Jenkins, etc., all of that stuff will integrate directly. Incidentally, we also have an ability to do things yourself, so you can actually kick off these processes via CLI. We have a CLI that you can use. We have a Terraform provider as well if you want to configure Octopus. There's all kinds of integrations that we have as part of this. Awesome. So there are some links you can check out. We've got our YouTube channel. We publish videos there almost weekly now, if not every week, but if not twice a week. We have our docs, which are awesome. And if you need to reach me, I've got my email listed there. Great. So I don't see any questions in the queue. I think either it made sense entirely or otherwise. Hopefully it made sense. Yeah. So great high level overview. Thanks. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I'll just wait here for 10 seconds if there are any questions. We're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. All right, there you go. Anyways, if I'll share with you just a couple of resources here. So let me just jump back in here. Obviously, this is kind of like, extra credit. Excuse me. So we have a roadmap you can check out. This is at roadmap.octopus.com. I'll just share the URL here if I can find it. Ooh, where is it? Sorry. Your call is important to us. Please hold. I don't have the link here. That's okay. Anyways, if you go to roadmap.octopus.com, you'll see a page that looks like this. Our roadmap is very public. We share not only things that are under consideration, but things that are planned and also things that are released. And we've shipped a lot over the past number of quarters, months, etc. So we're constantly keeping this up to date. If there's a feature that's missing in Octopus, chances are we've got it on the roadmap. If you also, you can, if you see a feature that's missing, you can submit an idea. We're very, very responded to these new ideas that come in. But you can see we've added a bunch of new capabilities. Most recently, we've added a feature called configure as code for runbooks. What this is basically allows you to emit the properties associated with runbooks as text files. You can check them into Git. We do have this built in the out of the box with Octopus. You can actually have Octopus underpinned by a Git repository. That's something you can take a look at as well. So these and other features are available up on the roadmap. But yeah, just wanted to bear that out. All right, that was me tap dancing here for just a couple of comments. Oh, nice. So nice to see you guys are using the chat window here to talk to each other. All right, that's awesome. All right, there you go. That's Octopus 101. Feel free to try a free trial. You can go onto our homepage, click on start a trial. You can download the bits yourself and install them as well if you want. But setting up a cloud instance is the easiest way to get started. So feel free to check that out. Check it out at octopus.com. Thank you for your time and attention. Really appreciate it today. And from all of us here at Octopus to all of you listening and watching, happy deployments. Take care.